Welcome to another Sunday School Bible class. Today's lesson is entitled Abraham. Today's lesson, entitled Abraham, took place about 200 years after the Tower of Babel, and that described a man by the name of Abram. Abram had a beautiful wife named Sarai. Although Sarai was beautiful, Sarai had a problem, so that she could not have children. Now, Abram and Sarai were good people. Many times, Abram and Sarai were very sad because they had no children. They grew old, wishing so badly that they were able to have children, but they could not. God knew that they wanted children, so one day God spoke to Abram and made Abram a very great promise. God told Abram to leave his home and his relatives and go to a land that God would show him. God promised to make of Abram and all his following generations a new great big nation. Remember, a generation is when a mother and a father have a child. The mother and the father belong to the older generation, and the child belongs to the new generation. God told Abram that each generation of his family would get larger and larger. In other words, each generation will have more and more children until after hundreds of years, Abram's descendants will number so many that no one will be able to count them. God promised that Abram will have one of the largest families on earth. But God made even more promises to Abram. God promised to bless him and make his name great so that for thousands of years after the time of Abram, everyone will still know his name. God promised he would bless anyone who helped Abram's family and trouble anyone who hurt Abram's family. Finally, God made one of the most important promises of all to Abram. God promised that someday someone in Abram's family would give birth to the Savior of the world. The Savior was going to come through Abram's family. What a great promise God made to Abram. Having a child seemed impossible, yet Abram believed God's promise and did as God said. Before he saw the land, before he saw the child, Abraham had faith, which meant that he believed God's promise before it happened. Like Noah, who believed God's promise to send a flood and built the ark before he ever saw the rain because he also had faith in God's promise, Abraham had great faith. Faith is very pleasing to God. When we have faith, it makes God happy, and God approves of you or is pleased with you, so he will let you in heaven. Abram left his father's land and all his relatives and traveled to a new land that he never had seen before, still believing God's promise to him. Abram was wealthy and had many servants and animals, and it was a long, dangerous journey. When Abram reached the land of Canaan, God spoke to him and told him that this was the land that God would give him and his descendants, and this land will become a great nation. Abram built an altar and offered sacrifice to God. Many years passed, and Abram was getting much older and still did not have one child yet. At the time of Abraham, when having many children was expected, and a man could have more than one wife to bear him many children. A married man could also have his female servants bear children for him, and these children would be part of his family. Sarah had a servant woman named Hagar. Sarah began to think that maybe God wanted Abraham to have a son with Hagar the servant, so Abraham would have a son. When Hagar had the son, whom they named Ishmael, it was prophesied that this son would also become a nation. Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. However, this was not what God had in mind. He was going to let Sarah have a son, and that son would be named Isaac, and it would be from Isaac that the great promised nation would come. And that's where the Messiah would come from, that nation. But Abram kept praying and offering sacrifice to God. One day, Abram asked God about his son, and God promised again that he would have a son. God then changed Abram's name to Abraham. This is the name that has become so great and famous. Do you know the song that we sing in Sunday school called Father Abraham? This is the Abraham that we're singing about. God also changed Abraham's wife's name from Sarai to Sarah. Then one day, when Abraham was very, very old, he was 99 years old, God said to Abraham, "This time next year, Sarah your wife will have a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will make of him a great nation." Sure enough, just as God said, when Abraham was 100 years old, Sarah his wife had a son, and she was about 90 years old, and they named him Isaac. They were so happy, they thanked and praised God for giving them a son. Remember, Sarah had a problem in her body so that she was not able to have a child even when she was young. Now she had a son when she was very old, which is normally impossible. This was a miracle. That means it could happen only if God did it. Because she was so old, everyone knew that this was an act of God, and God was glorified, meaning people everywhere had to give God the credit for doing this. Now, Abraham's faith in God was even stronger. He believed God even more. As for Hagar and Ishmael, because Ishmael started making fun of Sarah and Isaac, Sarah told Abraham she wanted them to leave. So they left the family, but they went out on their own, and God promised he would bless them, and Ishmael would become a great nation as God had promised. So whereas Isaac's descendants became the Jewish nation, or the nation of Israel, Ishmael's descendants became the Arab nation. So the Jewish nation and the Arab nation are actually half-brothers, the Jews and the Arabs, because they have the same father, Abraham. From now on, when God referred to Abraham's descendants, he would be referring to the descendants that came from Isaac, which later would be referred to as the Israelites, and much later, they would be referred to as the Jewish people. From these people, the Messiah would come. The promised Messiah would come from the descendants of Abraham through his son Isaac, not Ishmael. Abraham continued to pray to God and lived many more years and raised his son Isaac to obey and believe God as well. In our upcoming lessons, we're going to see how Abraham's family starts to grow and what happens to them. Do you know that the rest of the entire Bible is about Abraham's family? Come back and see what happens and let your faith in God grow too. Then you can make God happier by believing God's other promises. Oh yes, God has promises for you too. Do you want to know what they are? They're all in the Bible. So come back and keep on listening. See you later. Bye-bye.